So you still living over by Toledo?
Yeah, Perrysburg.
Get that one done. Get that one done. Get that going. Everything's rolling.
Is this going to go on YouTube again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Up in live from the Funderdome. I think we're getting a little better at flipping things up, being able to send it.
Cool.
Now. How's that?
That'd be awesome, because I can put it in my annual report.
Yeah, cool. That'd be great. That would be great. All right, you ready?
Yep.
25 seconds.
Is my level good? Am I good with the closeness to the mic?
The Eurythmics here as we open up the morning. And the doors to the Funderdome are wide open here on a Tuesday morning. And we have guests, as we always do. We talk education Tuesday morning, and I'm very fortunate because the gentleman that's with me here today is kind of one of a kind. He's in demand. I mean, this is like having a god with us today, guys.
I know.
How's that, huh? Dr. Douglas Kane. Doug Kane, how are you, bud?
Doing well.
It's good to have you in here. I think folks probably will remember that you popped in maybe last year or
The year before, I think.
year before. Yeah, it was 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Huh? But very heavily involved in what goes on over at Lake Erie and how the lake is doing and how do we turn the life of the lake around a little bit. And before you get off and disappear, which is what you're about ready to do. You wrapped everything up at Defiance College here a week ago.
Yes, we just had graduation. About 200 people graduated, so that was very nice. Had several restoration ecology students graduate, so looking for more to come on if you're interested.
Yeah, no doubt. Tell us a little bit about what you do at this point in time. What's the program at Defiance College?
So I'm in charge of the restoration ecology major, and basically what we do is you learn about how to and then actually do the ecological restoration work. So it's basically fixing problems that humans have made in the environment.
Yeah.
And we're one of the few schools that have this, and one of the only 2 or 3 small liberal arts based colleges that have a program in it.
You know what? That sounds like one of the smartest departments that you could ever possibly have, because whether we agree or disagree on global warming or whether we're creating it or how we're doing it or what's happening, the one thing we know is that we do have a problem that's already existing, that's already out in front of us. We can see it, and it needs to be restored and cleaned up, period.
Yes. I mean, I work a lot with the algal blooms, and really the situation is that in order to fix what's happening, we need to restore wetlands and do some things on the land. Even though it is an aquatic problem, it's not going to be fixed by doing things in the lake.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation that we're going to have with Doug here this morning, because I think you'll be intrigued with some of the things that are going on right now and some of the things that they know about why the Great Lake is getting greener in the state of Ohio and Lake Erie. I think we start, as we discussed before, part of the problem is how shallow Lake Erie really is. Am I correct there?
Yeah, Lake Erie is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes. Well, our Great Lakes. They're called the Laurentian Great Lakes because they drain out through the St. Lawrence River. But it's very shallow. It's also we're the farthest south, so it tends to be the warmest, and all those things promote algal blooms. And then the watershed is, for example, the Maumee watershed is 80% agricultural. So all those things together lead to lots of algal growth.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have the same problem to a lesser degree on all the other Great Lakes, Lake Michigan and all, because we still do have agriculture surrounding most of these lakes?
In some of the similar places, like Saginaw Bay, Green Bay, we see the exact same things happening. They're very agricultural watersheds, and they have they're embayments, so they're shallower than the rest of the lake.
I'm heading to Green Bay here next weekend for a wedding, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. Will it all be green by the time I get there, in celebration of the Packers?
No, things further up north, things happen a little later, so that probably won't be till later in the summer.
I've heard that's a very beautiful little area of water, though. Have you been up to Green Bay?
I've been to Green Bay for a Great Lakes conference when I was at grad school. Ooh, this would have been like 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You know what? It's creeping up on you. The same thing is creeping up on me and Doug Feely. Doggone 20. Yeah. Whoa, hold on a minute. When did you start? When did you get started?
So I went to OSU for all my degrees, and I think I started grad school would have been in '99, and graduated with my PhD in 2003, and then 2004. See, I'm forgetting all the years now. They all run together. Then taught at a couple different places, and I've already been at Defiance College. This just finished my 11th year.
Well, I'll tell you, that's hard to imagine too, Doug, because that seems like it was just yesterday as well.
Yep.
Now, when you were a young high school student, because we have an awful lot of them right now that are graduating soon, okay, and they're going to take that next step. Did you already know what you wanted to do? Is this your career choice at a young age, and how did that happen?
Well, I knew I wanted to do something in biology by the time I had graduated. That was always probably my best subject and the one I was most interested in.
Sure.
But really, once I went to Ohio State, that's where I found out about Stone Lab, where I teach and do research during the summer. And I went up there after my freshman year and fell in love with the place. And I only grew up about 2 miles from Lake Erie, so I was always interested in Lake Erie, and I grew up on a very a small lake. So I was always interested in lakes. And
where was that? Where?
Westlake. It's a western suburb of Cleveland, near right on the border. I grew up actually right on the border of Lorain and Cuyahoga County.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. And that hence all the Cleveland affiliations that you and I have together here at this point in time, and we'll get to that later because I can't let you out of here without talking basketball towards the end of this whole thing. I think Stone Lab started when and why was it founded?
Stone Lab has been around since 1895. Not in its present location. It actually started over on the beach at Cedar Point. But it's been OSU's lake laboratory since that time. Now it's on Gibraltar Island in Put-in Bay. So, and it really has been instrumental in a lot of the research done in the past, in the 60s and 70s, that helped restore Lake Erie to better conditions in the 80s and 90s. And now there's a lot of research being done now that we have some of these problems again, and there's every type of education up there. There's high school and middle school groups during the spring and fall. In the summer, there's college students, and lots of groups come through during that season when it's open.
So what are the types of things that you do in a summer, other than, we always see the pictures and you're always in shorts on a boat on Lake Erie. Looks like there's probably a skier behind the boat, but you can never see him. That's at least what Feely and I thought, and a couple guys that around here, Smith. We always conjecture that there's, obviously we're just seeing part of the picture. Reality is what? What kind of things do you do over there with the kids?
Well, the best thing about it is that you just walk out the door of the classroom and the lake's there, and the lake basically is the classroom. We're out setting up studies and in the water, or trawling for fish, out in the forests on the island. So tend to spend a lot of time actually out doing things, hands-on learning. So it's much better than just talking about something, because you're actually doing something.
Oh yeah, a lecture is one thing for concepts and all, but to actually do the job, you got to get your hands dirty, right?
Yep.
It sounds like a lot of fun. So, projects that you've been involved with so far, what types of things? I know because you come back and summarize and report and are called to talk about. But what are some of the things that you've done in your time on the island?
Well, I've worked with. We've had the what's called an REU program, Research Experience for Undergraduates, for about the last 12 or 13 years. Most of my students have worked on things like dissolved oxygen in the water. So that's another one of the issues. When there's too much algae, it falls to the bottom. Bacteria break it down. That takes up oxygen out of the bottom. And when we don't have the water mixing, like during the summer, then that can be a problem for anything that lives on the bottom, like fish or invertebrates.
Some of our where do some of our favorite fish live? Are we in danger of not having some of the fish that come out of the lake there that we enjoy so much in the summertime?
Well, the good thing about fish is that they can move. Okay. So, but they may move to a place that might not be the best spot for them for growth and such. Let's see, what else have I've had students. This summer, I'm actually having a student work on the Maumee River. We're going to be taking samples, looking at the types of algae and toxins produced by the algae.
Huh. Interesting.
And that's something, collaboration between OSU, BGSU, and Kent State.
Wow. It's a critical problem, and I know we have a number of farmers up here, and we're not trying to necessarily sit here and point the finger at a farmer and say, hey, you're the reason why this is the way that it is. But we are trying to show some reasons that this is happening, and they are part of it. And then at that point in time, we need to have a fix that includes everything, because we need to get the Great Lakes back and healthy, especially Lake Erie again, because there's just too doggone many bluegill and things like that come out of there that are too tasty. You know what I mean?
Oh, yellow perch is the most tasty of all.
Yeah. Yeah, so save the yellow perch. If
yes.
nothing else, your mission in life for us, Doug Kane, is to save the yellow perch in Lake Erie. All right, it's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. I need to step away for a commercial break here real quick. We're going to get into the problems that are facing Lake Erie and what are the actual causes for them and what's being done to try to fix it. I've got Dr. Douglas Kane here, Doug Kane from Defiance College with me. And what's the license plate say? Dr. Lake?
No, DK Lake.
Oh, okay, DK Lake. I thought it said Dr. Lake.
No,
yeah.
that'd be good too, though.
I think you need to get those changed, Dr. Lake. How's that? 20 minutes after 9 on the Cube. Dr. Doug Kane with us here today from Defiance College, and we got him just before he's heading over to the lake. And unlike the rest of you guys out there, he won't be out fishing every day and jet skiing and things like that. He'll actually be working. Doug, let's talk a little bit about how Lake Erie gets to the point that it's at, okay? And let's talk about our end here to start with, because you brought up a really good point here when you walked in, that the last few rains have an awful lot to do with what happens over in Lake Erie.
Yeah, what we're seeing, and some research out of Heidelberg University has really displayed this, is that we're getting bigger, large storms in the spring. And I don't have the number exactly, but 5 or 10 of the storms bring in about 90% of the nutrients, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So things like at the beginning of May and then this last week, those events are where all the nutrients are coming in, especially because there was a little window where it was dry, where everyone was in the fields. So they were probably planting and fertilizing and
well, you take that all the steps to the end, because I know I was out, fertilizing the yard. Okay, the neighbors were out there, all of the lawn companies were out. Everybody was doing the same thing. So the farmers probably are the biggest portion of it, because they've got such a huge amount of land that they're fertilizing. But we all kind of have been out there squirting something on our yards in the last 30 days.
The good news about at least yard care products, at least Scott's has removed phosphorus from all their fertilizer except the first, startup kit.
Ah, okay.
So that's good. The problem, and people don't realize that the Maumee watershed is the biggest watershed in all the Great Lakes. There's not actually that much phosphorus and other nutrients coming from any, if you were to divide it by individual acre or something, there's not that much. It's just that when you add up all that, it becomes a big amount.
Sure. So the Maumee watershed goes how far? What is the footprint on that?
It goes down to Lima and Findlay and west all the way to Fort Wayne and north up into Michigan.
Yeah, and all of that area around there, obviously farmland. That's what we do up here. Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, so then we get a situation like this where it's not good for the farmer either, because he's just spent or she's just spent a ton of money putting the crops in and putting the fertilizer on and everything else, and now you get this massive rain that we just got, and it washes that all away too. So he's now got to go back and do quite a bit of it again, possibly, and now also has discharged an awful lot of basically fertilizer into the watershed itself, which will eventually get to the lake.
The good news is that because of all these problems, there's been a lot of innovation and new, what are called best management practices and new technologies. Now with GPS and GIS, so global positioning systems and geographic information systems, farmers can tell what part of their field needs nutrients, what part does not.
Wow.
And that's called variable rate technology. The other thing that we now have is the ability to inject the fertilizer with the seed, because a lot of the problem is that it's been a lot of broadcast application, which is at the surface, and that's the stuff that'll wash off.
Right. Okay. So we're getting smarter with how we're applying this with most of the farm practices too nowadays. Finding most of the farmers are into that, or do we still have that old guard that's sitting out there doing the same thing they've always done, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to two things. One, you have to show them that it works.
Sure.
Number two, it's a business. So if there are incentives, or if it saves them money or makes them money, they'll be more inclined to do it. And I've seen a lot of people come around and say, well, this is definitely a problem, so we're going to do whatever practice X, Y, Z.
Sure. Well, a number of the farmers that I know around here, and I can't tell you I know a bunch of them, but the few that I do know, they are in a business, so they're out to try to make a dollar because they're like all the rest of us. They've got bills, they got a car, and they got a truck, and oh, by the way, that thing that it globally positions and wanders around their field, that bad boy costs them $250,000 to $500,000 most of the time. Okay, so they've got some big dollars on the line. So anytime that they could eliminate or improve. Eliminate a waste or improve practice, I'm sure most of them are just jumping on this stuff.
Yeah, because they don't want to lose nutrients. That's money down the river.
Yeah, it's heading exactly the wrong place for them. I mean, again, I think anybody that vilifies the farmers around here is not doing things correctly, because that's about the last thing that they really would want to do. And it does seem, and I guess we're in a world too where everybody wants it to happen today.
This is not going to be a short-term fix. We're talking decades here.
Yeah, I mean, so even if we do best practice right now, and even if you guys work as hard as you possibly can, and even if everything turns around entirely right now, we're talking decades before Lake Erie really is back to where you'd like to see it.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Now, have we ever faced a situation like this in the past?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I'll give that great answer.
Okay.
The yes is we had problems with what's called eutrophication. This is where there's too many nutrients coming into a body of water, and it causes all the problems we've been talking about, algal blooms and low oxygen and things like that.
Okay.
That happened in the mid-20th century in Lake Erie, but at that point, most of the problem was due to what are called point sources of pollution.
Okay.
So it was coming from municipalities, from industry, etc., etc. At that time, we didn't remove phosphorus from our sewage, so that would go into the lake. At that time, we had phosphorus in our detergents.
Sure.
So that went in the lake.
You used to brag about that. That was on TV all the time. Yeah. We got new tide with phosphorus. Yeah.
So all these things, then, when we removed them, that, and I should mention that there was also a lot of improvement on fields and things in what we call non-point source pollution, where you can't tell exactly where it's coming from.
Yeah.
So there was improvement there too, but so things got better.
When was this again?
So things when I was growing up, around Cleveland, things were getting really good. I'd heard the stories about how bad the lake was, and everyone knows the Cuyahoga River caught on fire and things like that. Other problems with the lake. But things were improving, and probably by the mid-'90s, it was, people were writing books like Lake Erie Restored, and it was probably one of the best ecosystem restoration stories out there.
And was it good? I mean, was it as good as what it was advertised?
I mean, the big problem then was the zebra and quagga mussels came in, but other than that, and it wasn't just the eutrophication problems that we had fixed. There were toxic issues and things that everything was getting better.
Sure.
But since the 90s, the nutrient issues, the eutrophication, since about the mid-90s, we've seen these problems coming back and as bad or worse than they ever were in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big reason why you guys are doing what you're doing. Let's talk about dollars and cents, because all we've heard is that dollars are going to be cut. You guys are going to not have any money to do what you need to do and continue to do what you've been doing. Where have federal funds been and state and local funds been for this project?
As far as I'm not the most up-to-date person on this, but the federal funding has been kept, as far as I know, for both Sea Grant and for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. I'd say that there's a lot of support in Columbus as well. One thing that I think has been really great is the Ohio Department of Higher Education has funded a variety of mostly public but some private entities like Heidelberg and some of the work I do to try and fix these problems, to try and, while we're waiting, it's going to take a while to, how can we still adapt and use the lake and make sure it's safe for people to swim and do all the things they want to do in the lake.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is good. And then really, and this is something, just yesterday I was in Toledo picking up a nutrient kit for testing. The Rotary in Northern Ohio has really taken this on as their project because, once again, it does come back to business. When you have these algal blooms, businesses lose a tremendous amount of money.
Sure.
Especially the tourist industry, which is maybe the second or third largest industry in Ohio. I forget.
Well, and especially up around that
up around
the
lake. That's the biggest tourist place in the state.
Heck yeah, that is probably 90% of what they do up there almost.
So they're helping out as well, and it really is. I remember a couple years ago the Cavs motto was all in.
Yeah.
And we really need everyone to work together on this.
Yeah, and be all in to get this doggone thing fixed. All right, let's talk about something else because part of the solution that we talked about off mic here today lies in these fields because there are now issues and now devices that can slow down the flow of some of this water coming out of the fields. Explain that to people too.
So one of the biggest things that I think we need to start doing a better job, and this is something that I think we can do pretty easily, is manage water better.
Okay.
There are structures that are called controlled drainage structures that go on the end of subsurface tiles that then discharge out into the ditches, and the ditches then run into streams and then river and then on the lake. What can be done there is you can hold water underneath the field. So, for example, now when we're having all this rain and that it likely has a lot of nutrients in it, hold it under the field and slowly let it out later, or even use it for the crops later in the growing season.
Huh.
And they've put in these, and really I just heard last week a lot of the barriers to putting these in is, in the past you had to actually go out and remove what they call boards that would change the level of the water. But I've heard that some people at the University of Toledo have invented something where you can it's automated, so no longer does the farmer have to go out there, because that gets very cumbersome and has stopped a lot of people from putting them in.
So now they can probably set it on a computer, push a button, do something, and automatically this will all take place throughout those fields. Residentially, what is there anything that a person that owns an acre of land on the edge of town ought to be thinking about at this point in time, or a quarter of acre in town?
I'd say rain gardens, anything that you can do to hold back water.
Okay.
Rain barrels. If you have a big enough yard and maybe a stream, put a wetland in or something. I mean, there's just some scale things. Once you have an area that used to be a swamp, and that's what it seems to be fighting to be a swamp again. Right. So we obviously don't want it to be a swamp because we want to live here and farm here and etc. But I think planting trees hold a tremendous amount of water and nutrients, and that can help tremendously. Yeah.
Back before we were all here, and this was a swamp, obviously this was one great big old filter for Lake Erie, which was at that time I would expect probably pristine, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, there's always a debate on how much the Native Americans had an effect on the lake, or whether it was much, or it was certainly in better condition than So pre 1800s, it certainly would have been in better condition then, and probably few, if any, at least of the harmful type of algal blooms. Maybe sometimes in a wet year and a warm year.
Even without us here, there can be algal blooms, is what you're telling me.
There can be, but there wouldn't be the magnitude. They probably would be, I would bet, more diatoms, which aren't typically bad. Those are good food for zooplankton and things like that.
Oh, okay.
And we do have those still.
Okay. All right. How are the zebra mussels right now in the lake?
They're still there. They kind of, it's actually their cousin that is probably 90% of the mussels in the Western Basin. It's called the quagga mussel.
Okay.
And their numbers have come down somewhat and then leveled off. And they do filter a lot of water, but they also excrete a lot of nutrients. So they that can, as some studies have shown, promote some of the harmful algal blooms. And the other thing that they do is in lakes, they often trap the nutrients near the shore. They take up the algae that grows in the shallower water, then release the nutrients, and it's a cycle, and it stays in that near shore zone.
Okay.
And in fact, the upper Great Lakes are having a problem right now. They don't have enough nutrients in the offshore. They're losing fish production because of this. It's called the nearshore shunt hypothesis, because of the mussels.
Huh. And it's the mussels that are causing that problem on that in that area. Huh. That's amazing. So we've not found a way to. There's no predators still to this mussel. Anybody like to eat these things at all?
Well, the gobies like to eat them.
Okay.
They're another non-native species, and that probably is some of why the zebra and quagga mussel numbers have come down.
Okay.
Native-wise, freshwater drum like to eat mussels.
Okay.
But not much. There's probably some. I mean, there's ducks and things that eat them, but
not enough of them at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mussels aren't going to ever go away. They'll be there.
Why? When we first heard about them, though, Doug, when the first news came out, they were going to take over the lake. By now, they were allegedly going to take over the lake in some people's minds, not necessarily everybody's. Have these predators slowed these guys down, or what has slowed them down if that's not the case?
Yeah, it's probably the gobies, I would think.
And the gobies got in how? How'd they
got in the same way through ballast water brought from Eastern Europe, the Black and Caspian Sea region. Okay. So, and they were quite used to living with these mussels and ate them when they got here. Okay.
Is there a problem with the goby? Does it eat any of our favorite fish at all? Should we be worried about that?
Well, it's a complicated story because it eats, for example, smallmouth bass eggs. Okay. But adult smallmouth bass eat it, and so do the Lake Erie water snake eat it, and that is thought to be part of the comeback for the Lake Erie water snake, along with more habitat being preserved along the Lake Erie Islands, and better public outreach. It's thought that the gobies really have helped the Lake Erie water snake numbers come up.
Huh, that's amazing how the downside on one end and then the upside on the other end on what we thought was a disaster relatively when you add these new species into a water system that they've not been in.
The good news is that there haven't been, since there's been a lot more legislation and new laws dealing with treatment and ballast discharge and a whole bunch of things. We haven't really had many new invaders in the last decade. Oh. So hopefully that problem is becoming less.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing as well. Dr. Doug Kane with me right now. We're talking about the Great Lakes Lake area in particular, and we'll wrap up that conversation and also get his look on how bad our Cavs are going to get beat or win by here tonight when we come back on the queue. It's about 17 before 10 o'clock. Yep. Wonderful. Well, you know what? I tell you what, we do have a really solid guest here today. A lot of times I can't get guys like this to show up because basically I operate on the lower level down there where there's no good oxygen, and Doug Kane operates on the upper level where all of the sporting fish live. So it's good to have him back in here. But before we start talking Cavs just a little bit, and it's good to know we do have some folks out there that are really intrigued with what we're talking about at this point. The Great Lake, the Lake Erie right now, you're a professor. You just went through an entire year where you had to give grades to people, okay? Give Lake Erie a grade, and what is its future at this point in time?
Well, I'd say if we're talking about the algal issues and the low oxygen, and if we're talking about the western basin of Lake Erie, it's probably a C-, D+.
Okay.
There's other parts of the lake that really have other issues. The eastern basin probably is a B. That is the problem that they have there is called cladophora. It's a non-harmful algal form that lives on the rocks, and but it fouls beaches and things like that.
So the eastern part would be part
Buffalo.
Of okay,
Buffalo would be the eastern basin.
Okay.
And there's actually, I always think of it as Canada's Florida. There's all these very nice beaches on the north shore of Lake Erie, and that's the most southern part of Canada. So that's why I always think of it's funny to think that way, but that's the problem there. And then the low oxygen is in the central basin, so maybe that would get a C, but the western basin, it's we're breaking records we don't want to break almost every other year with bigger and bigger algal blooms.
Yeah, and that's us. Yeah. That's Toledo and our area over through this part of the country. Wow. Okay. The opportunity to turn this whole thing around and make it work from your perspective.
Like I said, it's not going to get fixed tomorrow. We have to have realistic goals, and I think the governments, the U.S., Canada, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, all of them have set good targets. We just need more implementation. And like I said, the big rains that we have and things, we really need to do something with water management. That's really key. And I mean, that's the cities are removing their combined sewer overflows. That's where when it rains a lot, they don't have the capacity to treat it, so that's when sewage can go out into the lake or into rivers and things. They're fixing that. Toledo and Cleveland have built huge tunnels underneath the city to hold water back. And I think really we need to look at these controlled drainage structures. Anything that can prevent the water from getting out from the field into the ditch, into the stream, into the river, into the lake. Anything that can hold it back. Wetlands, where we can put them back. Plants hold a tremendous amount of water and nutrients. Trees where we can plant them, things like that.
Yeah. You kind of correlated this time to what we saw when I was a kid in the 50s, 60s, 70s when Lake Erie was on fire at times. And at that point in time, people said that couldn't be turned around, though, too, didn't they?
Yeah, that's true. In some ways, though, I think it was an easier fix at that time because we could say, you could go to this municipality and say, you can't discharge from this pipe this amount of nutrient or whatever. And
sure.
You can go directly to that and see if they're doing it. When it's such a diffused problem over such a big basin, it gets, like I said, it gets to be it'll take decades to fix.
Yeah, much
But
more
I think
difficult.
it is fixable.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what the problem is. That a couple of, when I was in grad school and right out of that, we weren't quite sure what was happening.
Yeah. Well, it is really interesting that people are working on it. It's great to hear that the funds are still there to keep working. I know there are farmers in our area at this point in time that have changed their philosophies and the way that they do business, and that makes an awful lot of sense. So hopefully we can be realistic about this whole thing because the major problems out there, unlike what you see on TV or unlike what you get to deal with on Facebook, they just don't fix themselves in a matter of seconds or overnight. They take some time. And hopefully that's what we're working on at this point. Our county still has some folks that do have their own waste issues out in the area because we don't have county sewers everywhere. And they're in programs at this point in time now to deal with septic tanks and older septic tanks, and I know our county is very, very active with that. What effect do the septic systems have on these problems that you can see, Doug?
They're a part, but they're a small part.
Yeah.
And they're probably more localized part, I would guess.
Okay.
From what I know of them, but I know that there are lots of funds right now in the counties around here because a lot of them were put in and have never been updated or maintained in the way they should have been.
Sure.
So. And there you also have bacterial issues and things like that can pop up. So fixing those will help. I mean, everything, if you start adding up everything, it's not going to be one group having to fix this. It's everybody. Yeah,
no doubt about that. Well, as a side plug, if you do have a septic system around the area right now, tomorrow is the last meeting. It'll be at Edgerton High School in their Commons area at 7 o'clock. And anybody around the area that has questions about the septic system that they might have at their house, one of their relatives' houses, or a house that they own, or whatever it might be, please go in. It's not a punitive meeting. It is probably a meeting that can find you some dollars if you need them to fix what you need to fix and what you're worrying about. And so please do that, or contact the health department up in Montpelier. All right, Douglas, we have talked enough business right now. How's that? Let's get to the serious business. You and I are both Cavs fans, so you and I both turned the television off early the other night, probably, and cursed a little bit and hung our heads and walked away. What happened the other night with the Celtics, and what's going to happen tonight for our Cavs? Tell me it's a little bit happier night.
I'm not sure what happened because they had plenty of time to rest. They looked very lackadaisical and not interested to be playing, really.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of Game 6 of the Pacers series, where they really didn't show up. But if you look at history, the game after they get blown out, LeBron tends to put on an amazing, he'll have a triple-double or a double-double with 40 points or something.
Sure.
So I'm hoping for that tonight.
That's what we need. You know what? Part of the reason I enjoy NBA basketball is it isn't one or done. You don't play one game and go home. You got to beat me 4 out of 7. And the tournament doesn't start, as they say, until somebody wins one on your court. So tonight would be a way of turning things around and getting things back in our pocket here nicely.
Yeah, they just need to steal one.
Yep.
At the Garden. And it's funny that you said that because LeBron said, this isn't March Madness. I didn't go to college.
Yeah.
So, it's not one and done. It's a series.
Yep. You have also been a long-standing and long-bleeding Browns fan, much like myself, okay? We've changed management for the umpteenth time in the last umpteen years. Any optimism for the fall or not?
I always have optimism. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep on sharing season tickets with my brother. But I wasn't very happy with their draft. I thought, I don't know who they should have taken, but both their picks were not in the first round were not who I was hoping for.
You got a Buckeye, man. You got a Ward.
I know. People say shutdown corner, but I'd rather have a pass rusher.
Yeah.
And any quarterback other than Mayfield. So that's I just see him as Johnny Manziel Part 2.
Yeah, boy, let's hope not. And I felt the same way. And my get together with my kids and our draft party ended in about 30 seconds. After that pick, everybody was ready to go home. It was not. And then once you got to number 4 and you went the way we went, they all did go home at that point. So it didn't work well.
I mean, a shutdown corner is important. I think that will help them because their backfield's been terrible. But
sure.
I think turning around quickly, a pass rusher is the way to go. But maybe like Lake Erie's problems, this is not going to be solved in 1 year.
Yeah, and then let's hope that we'll stay on in the contention for a number of years like the Cavs have done here recently. All right, Doug Kane has been our guest. Dr. Kane, Dr. Lake, we're going to get that changed on your license plate too. And he's going to be heading out to Stone Lab here shortly. Doug, if there are anybody that is listening right now that really is into this, and I know we have one person that definitely is, but if they would like to contact you, how would they go about contacting Doug Kane?
The best way is email. My email is dkane, Kane, at Defiance, DEFIANCE.edu.
Okay, so dkane at defiance.edu. And Kane is spelled with a K, Kane. Okay, so it's easy to do. We'll put it up on our Facebook page as well. This interview will be up live from the Funderdome here as well later on today for you to take a look at if you missed it today. Douglas, as always, thank you for stopping by. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for the invitation. Glad to come.
You know what? Keep up the great work down at Defiance College. And if somebody would be interested in your program at Defiance College, who would they contact down there? Email you
Email
again?
me at the same address I just gave. It's the Restoration Ecology Program.
That is wonderful. And there is a lot of hands-on education in that class, isn't there?
Correct.
Which is what you need as a student as well. So Doug Kane has been our guest. We appreciate his time. That'll wrap up our hour here for the education program on a Tuesday morning as we get back into classic hits. We'll be here to 1 on the Q 96.5 FM.